Well, ladies and gentlemen, it really is wonderful to see so many of you here this evening. I think not a spare chair. But the reason for giving a talk called 100 Years Ago is because just before COVID, the new owner of the drapery shop, Jardine's drapery shop in Gatehouse, came across a mass of invoices and other shop papers from roughly 100 years ago, from about 1900 to the late 1920s. I mean, the first document was from the 1880s. Now, these papers were given to Leslie Richmond, the archivist, and she was going to give a talk on shops and shopping in Gatehouse, and she did a little exhibition of some of the documents up at the mill, but COVID intervened, and then, as many as you will know, that she so sadly died last year. So I thought we must try and find these documents and see if we can give some sort of a talk about what they contain. And with the help of David, who's here, we managed, after quite a time, to locate them in the garage. But it's amazing that they've been there for 100 years and they're all quite dry, really. But the draper shop's not the first shop in Gatehouse. I just thought we'd put the shops in a wee bit of context. And there have been some shops in Gatehouse that go right back to the start of Gatehouse. The baker's shop here, the bakehouse as you can see it today, it was built in 1782. That was when the few dates from. And it closed as a baker in 1975. I know that because the photograph that I took here on the 3rd of January 1976 has got the for sale sign in the window. So that was it. It was Keynes that were the last baker. But the point I wanted to make out of that photograph is that the front has hardly changed at all. But because it's a baker's shop, or was a baker's premises, and if you know the bakehouse, the bake ovens are still there, because of the big capital investment, I think that a bakery would stay the same, whilst quite a number of other shops changed a lot. And there's another example of a baker. That was Petrie, the baker, who again was there from the late 1870s to just after the Second World War. But if you look at 21 High Street, again, there's absolutely no different in the frontage apart from the door of the shop. But it's Sam Petrie and Jimmy Edgar who were the bakers in that photograph. When exactly that was taken, but probably about 100 years ago. There were different kinds of shops. Sometimes you get evidence, like this was a photograph I got of a clock from the 19th century, and it says Robert Halliday Gatehouse. Because with the Industrial Revolution, you started to get the mass production of goods. So you would be able to buy a Wedgwood china set, things like that. But would it not have been quite difficult to bring a lot of goods to Gatehouse when most goods came by sea? And it wasn't till the coming of the railways that you started to get many more branded goods coming into places like this. And other information you get on buildings and premises sometimes comes from bankruptcy papers. And the bankruptcy of David Creedy, who had a nursery in Gatehouse, really in Gary's Park, he went bankrupt in 1850, but he was buying beer from Andrew Kirk, who in the 1840s here was the brewer. They must have had to buy lots of beer to keep the nursery workers going. A shops or premises that changed really with whoever was the owner or were post offices. And that's the post office building today. That's your house, Dennis. And so that was the post office about 1900. But again, very little or no change in the buildings there. And that's just a general picture of Gatehouse about 100 years ago. That's the town hall before it was altered after the reorganisation of local government. You've got the paper shop here, Kirkpatrick's. On the far side, you've got the Union Bank. But you'll notice that in this photograph, the street is still cobbled at the sides and it's not tarred in the middle. So a place like the streets would be very dusty in the summer and they would have to water the street. And that's just looking up the high street. The picture on the left, you might think it's a very old photograph. I think it's the 1880s because of the shops that were there. But you can perhaps see further up the shop that's now the scone kitchen. There's no shop there. Whereas if you look in this picture, you can see that there's what was Henderson's shop 100 years ago. A thing you'll notice in this picture is there's really no traffic, no cars. So if you were coming into Gatehouse, you could certainly have parked. But I think they would really be doing their shopping locally because there weren't the supermarkets or reasons to go to other places. But a big change takes place in places like other places with the coming of plate glass windows. Now, I understand that plate glass, they began to have that in London at the end of the 18th century. But bringing up a big piece of plate glass to Gatehouse, perhaps even on a train, and then bringing down from Dromore would have been quite a business. But on the left there, you can see that from the 1879, Mr. Hall was the chemist in Gatehouse, and he called his shop Apothecary's Hall, which was quite nice name. But then in the 20th century, you then get Stark the chemist, and people will remember Bob Graham, Gatehouse people, who was in the chemist for many, many years. But you'll see that the Stark the chemist sign is still there behind the boot sign. That was a condition of the planning. But the thing to notice is that it says Stark, chemist. Because he wasn't a Stark chemist, he was Stark the chemist. Another thing you'll notice is branded goods were coming in. And if you remember reading the 5 Red Herrings, Gowan gets involved in a fight and he gets treated for his wounds with Virol. And Virol was a big thing, antiseptic in the 1920s. I didn't know anything about Virol till we did an exhibition on Dorothy Sayers and managed to find a bottle of Virol from the museum. But you can see the branded goods there. There was another phase of shops with the plate glass. That's after the Second World War. And on the left, you've got the Red Steps, the library, and then what later became the post office and gift shop with Mr. Park Hill in about 1952. But you can see the shop that's ceased trading there. That was a co-op furniture store. And there were several co-op stores in Gatehouse, because Henderson shop became the co-op. The butcher shop in the middle of the high street, Cochrane's, was a co-op butcher. But for some reason they didn't stay that long, the co-op. And then when they left, it did leave some premises empty for quite a long time. But it's just decorated for Christmas. It's not little panes of glass, it's the big shop fronts. And another shop, you've got the Market Cross stores. And on the left, that's in the 1920s, you've got Duncan McInnes, who was the shopkeeper, and he was the father of the famous Hamish McInnes, the mountaineer. It's not Mrs. McInnes, but it's the assistant, whose name I can't remember. But then, in the late 1940s, the premises were bought by Jack McKee and his sister. And again, you can see a large shop front there. Now, some people will remember this man on the left, Jack McKee. But that's just, I really have very few pictures of interiors of shops. And it was really, they're probably quite basic things, standard things that were on sale. And shops, they weren't that big. And that's just to show you that a shop like that was then transformed back into a house about 2000, though the Chiropodist was here on the right. And then you've got the Union Bank, just to remind us that the Bank of Fleet was the Union Bank. The Union Bank joined up with the Bank of Scotland, so they only needed one bank, and that's Andrew Crosby, who was the bank manager in the 20s and 30s. And this is outside Frulani's shop, and it's ice cream and confectionery and such like, but it says billiard room. So that till when they had the billiard room, I don't know. But this may be a gala day parade or something. Right, we'll come to Jardine shop. Till 1912, it was Jardine and Palmer. But the thing that you'll notice here is that you've got the lady here that's the milliner. It says millinery in the window. Then you've got the two shopkeepers and then 6 tailors. So they were employing 6 tailors. So that was because, if you were able to buy a suit or have a suit made, it would be made locally. People were not going to be going far away to buy things. And I'm afraid it's not such a good photo, but that's the tailors in the inside of the tailor's shop. I think they're sitting cross-legged, as tailors should be. I'm not convinced, but I think this one is. Now, we know that this photograph was before 1912, but we don't know exactly when, so we don't know who the people are. But from the Jardine records, we've got the wages books. So the top tailor was William Sinclair. So I just took a year 1909, which was within the period that the photograph would have been taken, and looked at the 1911 census. So you get all the people: William Sinclair, tailor's cutter, John Patterson, tailor. So perhaps if you looked at the photograph, you would see, which ones are the oldest, but there might have been somebody else. But you'll notice that the more junior ones, they're just getting paid £1 a week. So just think of inflation. And poor old Margaret Henry, the tailor's machinist, she just gets 5 bob a week. And J. Patterson, what age was she? The apprentice, 4 shillings a week. But you'd have to, I haven't got other shops or other tailors' businesses to compare with. But it's nice to know that these are the actual people who are working in the shop. And they will be the forebears probably of people that living in Gatehouse today. That was just a thing to show a bill from the millinery shop. So just for those months at the beginning of the year, they sold £10 worth of hats and things. And that's the letterhead for Robert Jardine's business. General draper, silk mercer, outfitter, millinery, family mourning, and stationery. Because if you don't see the letterhead, you don't actually know what happens behind the shop window. But they were the agents for the Kirkcudbrightshire Advertiser, which was the day before the Galloway News. So if you had a notice to put into the paper, you went there. And not to the Kirkpatricks, who were the news agent across the road. That's just a later photograph. I mean, people will remember the shop pretty much looking like that over a long time. And then it's got Robert Jardine. There are various invoices in that collection that really shows sort of the relationships or the context in Gatehouse in the 1920s or thereabouts. I mean, it's great to have a letterhead from the Gatehouse Gas Company. I've no idea how much gas they were using in therms or cubic feet or whatever, but 7 and 6 for their gas bill. And the photograph here on the right, that has to be taken before 1906 when Riverside House was built. But this is the gasworks here, if you can see, and that's the building that became Campbell's Garage in the 1930s, and when Campbell's Garage closed, that became the Fleet Valley. So that is just an indication, but in 1919 the gasworks closed, and it wasn't until the 1930s that there was electricity, mains electricity in Gatehouse. So if people didn't have a generator, it would have been back to the oil lamps. And just to show that Gatehouse was a town, because I think one of the big problems that we have in Scotland is that community councils, they have no powers, they have no money to do things. So you can see this was the notice of rates for the ratepayers of Gatehouse. But the sum is not important. It's really that they were paying the general rate, the water rate, the public health rate, and the sewerage rate. So all these things were being run by the provost and councillors in Gatehouse for the benefit of Gatehouse. And also, just to remind you that all these premises in the High Street, they were all feus from the Calley estate. The people had purchased the plot back in the 1700s. And in 1772, the Ayr Bank went bust. And Mr. Murray, who was at Calley, was a director. Well, he was a director of the Dumfries Bank, which became amalgamated. And Mr. Murray had to pay back £16,000. So if you think that a tailor was paid £1 in the 1920s, to pay back £16,000 in the 1770s was a huge sum, millions and millions. And Gatehouse really slumped because there was no work, because people were either paying back or Murray couldn't pay people, and a lot of people went away to America. And then Mr. Murray tried to sort of re-advertise Gatehouse, and that was when the mills, the building here, came in. But the few duties were reduced to £1 a year. So that says 2 shillings for 2 years. So it's just it's a reminder. People could go shopping at the tailor, at the drapery in different ways. There were people who would have an account. There were people who could go and take the money into the shop and pay for something. But there was also a clothing club. So from 1905 to 1920, there was a clothing club so that people could pay in installments to buy things. And you can see that's the number of people that were in the clothing club when it closed in 1920. So, I mean, why it closed then, I've no idea. But there's a record going back. And I've just chosen there, you'll see that that's H in the accounts. And one of the people is Hunter from the sawmill. And I know quite a lot about Hunter from the sawmill because that's Margaret Wright's grandpa. So she told me about photos. Shops that people will remember in Gatehouse maybe, but bought off McMurray Brothers. And you can see here, if you can see all right, it's quite clear all the things that they did or that you could buy at McMurray Brothers. So I remember as a small boy getting hooks for fishing with the worm, and it says fishing tackle, and clocks, watches, barometers, music. But it says also motor and cycle agents. And they had motorbikes with sidecars. And you can see here that this is a bill to Jardines for sidecar to Curdle and a sidecar to Whiteside. So 4 shillings to Curdle and 2 and 6. So it's a week's wages for a tailor's apprentice to hire a sidecar. I think they must have taken goods out for fitting to the houses and maybe spent a time there measuring people up. And similarly, you've got Crosby's, and Crosby's garage was opposite the Murray Arms Hotel in the, as it says, posting stables. And you can see it says cars, carriages, hearse, etc. A thing that I quite like on some of these old letterheads is you can see the telephone number, Gatehouse 7. And quite often, if it's 7 becomes 27 or 227, and they've carried on. But you'll see here again, this is that during the wartime, maybe they reverted to more use of horse-drawn traffic. Perhaps it was difficult to get fuel because you can see, or maybe it says hire of gig to Murrayton, William Sinclair. So William Sinclair, the tailor, must have had to spend a day at Murrayton fitting the people up, and it cost 5 bob. So again, a week's wages. So very expensive hiring the tailors. And again, without a letterhead, you don't actually know what people did, but a letterhead suggests what they were doing. So Alexander MacDonald, he's the blacksmith in Digby Street, 1916 here, and you can see that they're also doing cycles, repair, locks, railings, grates, ranges, etc. And this is the interior of MacDonald, the blacksmith. But you can see the man that's third from the left, that's sitting there, is James Hunter from Cally Sawmill. But he looks very smart in his suit. And you can see here, there's a bill here from 1913, and it says James Hunter Sawmill, and a tweed suit. He's getting a tweed suit. So I've no idea whether that's a tweed suit that he's actually wearing, but he looks smart. Another business that was doing things for the drapers is Smith and Murray. And that's the building, it was once the Bay Horse pub. And the question is whether Robert Burns stayed there or across the road. It lasted longer than the Murray Arms, so the Murray Arms kind of gets the credit. But again, you'll see, I mean, how much did a joiner charge in 1917? Shop door and refitting lock, 1 and 2pence. Not many joiners would come out for that. And altering the tailor's board. I wonder if that meant that that was what the tailors were sitting on. Or maybe they had to lower it for them to be sitting at. I don't know. We're seeing that Jardine's the kind of main draper's shop, but there's also Ferguson's, and they seem to be selling similar things. And they were buying from each other, but also Kirkpatrick, who I always thought was the newsagent, and it was indeed the newsagent, calls himself or themselves linen and woolen drapers, booksellers, stationers, and newsagents. So you wouldn't know, again, unless you saw the letterhead. What's great about some of the invoices is that things were ordered for individual people, a lot of things. So I'm quite surprised that you could order, or not, that one item could be ordered from a manufacturer. And you see here, on the left, it's the Enric copper mine, which was in existence before the First World War. And this is the Ardrossan Oilskin and Waterproof Company. Now, we know that the Frulani family, who came from Italy, they came originally to Scotland as miners. And here it says that it's a yellow oilskin jacket, special made. And it says here, miner Italian. So we can assume that one of the Frulanis or another Italian was working here at the mine. Whoops, sorry, just gone too far. You might be surprised that people in Gatehouse were shopping at Burberry's. But they obviously were, because there were quite a number of invoices. A thing I liked about the Burberry invoice is that people are always talking about logos. And the horse, the Burberry horse, that was in existence 100 years ago. And I think it hasn't changed at all. But this is, and again, it says on the invoice, this is for Derek McCutcheon. Well, here's young Derek. He lived at Lochliach with his parents, and the McCutcheons were great horse breeders, and his father, Alexander McCutcheon, became the baillie and provost of Gatehouse. So I'm sorry, I haven't got a picture of Der, as he was known, with a Burberry coat on, but it's a lovely horse. And then we have a picture here of the Cardness carriage. The big houses would have a carriage before the First World War. Lovely carriage. It's got the coat of arms here, the fine pair of matched horses. I was told what kind they were, but you can see here on the left there's an invoice, and it's from the rubber manufacturer in Dunfermline. It was people called Stewart. They coated linen in rubber for waterproof wear. And it says here for Cardness, for Hunter, who was the coachman, a double-breasted waterproof coat, it says. I think he's got a more fine weather coat on, but that's him on the coach at Cardness. And then there's various invoices. I just really like the letterheads and the fact that things came from where you would have expected them to come from. And Downing, their goods coming from Leicester. Leicester was the centre of the hosiery industry, and that's a nice letterhead from Downing in Leicester. These people are called Copestake, Crampton and Company. I just included those because it's for an order of kid gloves. We always hear about being careful with kid gloves, and whether people buy kid gloves today, I have no idea, but you could get kid gloves in Gatehouse in the 1920s. Again, nice pictures on the letterheads. And then, just to show the range of things that the drapery shop was selling. So here you've got carpets for gardeners. Whether they've still got the carpets, I don't know. Again, Manchester, the great cotton centre, they were buying lots of overalls, as you would expect from Manchester. Says so many dozen overalls. But as well as buying individual things, they would buy things in more bulk. And this is like buying tweed. There's a whole list of tweeds from Williamson and Company warehousemen in Edinburgh. So that would be for the tailors. And I was quite surprised that there were a number of invoices from British Celanese, because artificial fibres come in the 1920s, and British Celanese was founded in 1923. Margaret Argyle's father was a director of British Celanese. It's surprising perhaps that you could buy one slip from British Celanese for Miss Purdy. And I remember as a child, chill-proof vests. So I just thought I'll include it. I never saw how you spelled chill-proof. No, I think I hated chill-proof vests, but that was just sort of something there. But I was saying that they must have spent quite a lot of money on delivering things and getting things and using gigs and sidecars and things like that. But in the 20s, you get vans coming in. So this is Henderson's, and this is Henderson's van. And people remember, later on, you've got people like Jack McKee had a van, Willie Wilson, the fishmonger, had a van. And in some ways, that's coming back to what we see today, whether it's a Tesco van or Willie Little's van coming from Creetown, or the fish van coming round the town. So things sort of come round again. Now, I like this photograph, because that's a photograph of a nice family photograph of the people there. And it's been photobombed by, I just blew that up a little bit. That's the baker's boy or the butcher's boy. And you could, shops would have these boys to come round with bakers or butchers, whatever. And just to finish up, it's just to remind us that places change all the time. And that's a project I did at the Millennium with Jeff Keating, with took a photo of all the businesses in the year 2000. And that's us at the potting shed, starting off at the top of the high street. But that, in 2023, did you know that it's Bluebell Cottage Interiors there? So things change all the time. So that's it then. If anybody's got any questions, delighted to try to answer them. And tomorrow, if anybody would like to go for a walk up the high street at 10 o'clock, have to go about 10 because I've got another event later.
Saturday.
Oh, Saturday's what I mean. Saturday, yes. Get a rest tomorrow. Saturday, we'll take a walk up the high street. But anyway, thank you very much and welcome any questions.